What's going on, everybody? This is my long-awaited YouTube tutorial on how I make Pokemon in Blender. If you haven't seen my channel, I do little speed runs where I make Pokemon in like 15 or 10 minutes, and usually they come out pretty bad, but I've had a lot of people ask me for some tutorials on how to do this, and I figured that we could make a Pokemon together. So this is the first thing you're going to see when you open up Blender. Your scene might look a little bit different than mine, but they're all typically the same thing. We're just going to start a new file with general here, and you're going to have three items right in front of you. You have a camera, a light, and a cube. And we can select all of these items by clicking on them, and we can shift click to do multiple, or we can just click drag and grab the whole thing. Navigating this is a little weird at first, but to move around, we just use the mouse button, or the middle mouse button rather. We could click it down and we can rotate, we can zoom in, or if we hold shift and middle mouse button, it lets us drag our camera around a little bit like that. So we're going to start off in this layout scene. As you can see in the top left up here, you have a bunch of tabs. We're going to be in layout, which is in object mode. This is really good for adding and sort of doing basic transformations to meshes. So we can get rid of these if we just hit A. We can select everything, and then we'll hit X and delete. And now we have a fresh canvas. So we can start off by adding a mesh. Let's try adding a UV sphere here. And you can see that we can, on the left toolbar over here, we could toggle by hitting T. We can move it, we can rotate, or we could scale it. These are the basic operations that I use in layout mode, and the shortcuts are super helpful to use. If we want to move these objects around, we can hit G, we can hit S to scale it, and if we want to rotate, we hit R. Now, if you ever get lost and your camera gets like upside down and you don't really know where you are, if you look in the top right here, it shows you a little view of what you're looking at, and we can skip to the front of it by hitting any of these axis points here. If we want to look at it straight down, we hit the Z. If you hit it again, it'll flip it to the negative Z, so we're looking at it from the bottom. And we could also use the numpad to do little shortcuts for this. So in the top left, if we go into modeling mode, we can see that we switch to edit mode over here, which will allow us to view either the vertices, the edges, or the faces, depending on this little slider that you have over here. You can also change this by hitting 1, 2, and 3. And this will allow you to manually change the geometry of this item. So if we were to want to lift up just this one vertex here and make it a little bit pointy at the top, we would grab that one and then just slide it on up. We could use either the move tool over here, or we can hit G and then grab that and move it around. Now, if you want to move something on a specific axis, we can use shortcuts for that as well. So let's say we want to just move it straight up. I'll hit G to move, and even if I move it to the side, if I don't click down yet, if I hit Z, it'll lock it into just moving up and down. Same thing goes for Y and for X. Now, one thing you might notice that if we try to grab, let's say, all of the vertexes here, if we just try to click and drag and grab the whole thing, you'll notice that we only grab about half the item, not even. We're missing a couple at the top there and at the bottom. So one easy way to combat this is if we hit Shift and Z, we'll go into X-ray mode, and that will let us see straight through our object. This works in object mode as well, and it'll let us see straight through it and see through the back, and we can sort of pick and choose which points we want. If I wanted to grab them all, now I can edit the entire thing this way. Or let's say I just wanted to lift up this top half. Whoops. Let's say I wanted to lift up the whole top half, make a little pill shape. That is one way that we could do it. So a couple of useful functions in edit mode that I like to use, specifically, let's say we grab this whole top right here, let's say inset faces is really good. So if we hit I, we can just click and drag these vertexes in. It'll create new ones, and now we have a totally new face in the middle here that's a little bit smaller. Another good one, well, first of all, we could move this around. You could see it'll edit that a bunch. Another one that we could use is extrude, which is E, which will allow us to just pull that shape right out. And we could still hit S and scale this and make some weird shapes. Sort of looks like a Christmas present. Loop cuts are also really good. If you're on Windows, we can hit Control R, and you'll see that this this yellow line goes across. We could add more. Actually, if we click down, you'll see that it adds a split sort of through the middle here that we could also use to adjust the item. But if we go back through Control Z, if we hit Control R one more time, we can actually add a lot more loop cuts by adjusting our middle mouse button. If we scroll in a little bit, we can just, for each click, it'll add another one. So if I wanted to add a bunch of these here, we can hit that. And then if I wanted to scale them, we'll go into X-ray mode, and then we'll scale that out that way. Of course, I messed that up. Beautiful. So another useful one is beveling. If we have our cube here and we want to make these corners a bit smoother, we could hit Control B, and then we can move our mouse. Oh, it's being funky. And yeah, you can see we could just soften those corners a little bit. Now it looks like a companion cube a little bit. And the last thing that I use in my Pokemon projects is the sculpting function. So if we add an icosphere over here and we add some subdivisions, if you get this little pop-up menu down here, if we don't click off of it after adding an object, we can add some subdivisions, which is just making it's just increasing the polygon count basically. And then if we go into sculpting, you'll see we have a bunch of tools over here which we can use to shape and change our object's geometry. This is all permanent stuff, so whatever you do to this, you can Control Z up to a point, but I would recommend being careful with what you do in sculpt mode. Usually you're going to want to have your mirrors on, but it all depends on what you're doing. So for example, let's, we have this draw tool right here. We can start to draw on it, and you'll see that it basically just lifts up and increases what we got going on over here. And we can Control Z to get rid of that. It only does it for the geometry that we already have. So if we want to make it look a little crispier, a little more high res, we can go to the Dyne Topo function up here, which just means dynamic topology. It's going to add more as it sees fit. And we can start to draw on that, and you'll see it's a little bit more defined if we're just adding some stuff here. And there are so many different functions that you can go through with this. I would recommend just, going through and messing around on a sphere like this and having a blast. I would recommend using this. You could see the symmetry function up here. We have X, Y, and Z to go with each one. As you push in an item, move it around, sculpt it, you're going to want to make sure that these are on if you're doing something that requires the littlest bit of symmetry. All right, so let's make our Pokemon. I think the first thing that everybody should use is a reference. So let us go into a front-facing view here. I like to use the x-axis. Just don't mind me. If you do it the opposite way, that's fine. Let's go to Add, Image, and then Reference, and this will open up all of your personal files. And so we can find our reference for Mudkip that we downloaded from the internet. Let's find that. There it is. And we can click and move it around. We could scale it. I wouldn't rotate it if I were you, but to each their own. And I always start out with a basic shape. So we could look at Mudkip. We could try to figure out what shapes that we want to do. I'm going to go with an icosphere because I find that these are the most, these are just like the easiest for me to sculpt. It really depends on what you're doing. Let's drag that up. We'll make it a little bit smaller, and we can start sort of sizing this down. Now I can see that his head is a little bit squat, and one thing that we can do is we can scale this just along the the Z axis by hitting S and then Z, and we'll see that we can just squish his head just a little bit. I think that's a good spot right there. And then if we want to use another UV sphere for the body, we can hit Shift and D and then click down right away, because if you start moving it around, you're going to duplicate this sphere and then you're going to place it somewhere, wherever. So we'll Shift D, click down, and then we can hit G to move and Z to move it along the Z axis. And now we have a little bit of a body. And we're going to also want to move this back oops, we didn't move our reference back. So to do that, we could hit G and X. And so we just slide it along the X-axis, right? Move it all the way back there. And I'll do the same with the body. I'll hit G and X. And now if I wasn't doing the X, if I wasn't hitting X after this, and if I tried to slide this body back, I'll move it over here, and it looks okay from this angle, right? But then if I go up from the front, we'll see that his body is way off to the left. So we want to make sure that we're working along the axis here. We could just move it down the X. And his body's a little long, so we'll also hit S to scale, and then X to make it a little bit longer. And we're going to change, we're going to edit that through sculpting in the future. And that's pretty good. We can use another sphere for his legs. So we can hit Shift D one more time, GZ to drop it down. And for now, let's just scale it real small. Maybe move it along the Y-axis. Maybe move it up, down, somewhere right there is okay. And that's not bad. So this is our starting body shape. And it doesn't look like much, but we'll get there. I think for the fin at the top, we can either use another sphere, or one thing that we can add is a circle. We could just add a plain old circle. And you'll notice that this circle doesn't actually have any geometry. It doesn't have a face to it. So one thing we could do is we could go back to modeling, or we could just tab into edit mode. And then we can go to face and grid fill. We could also just hit F. If we didn't do grid fill, we would do this, right? And you can see that this is just one face. So when we start to edit this and try to move these around, if there's any, let's switch to render mode. You could see that it's hard to see now, but this is all one face. And when we start to add lighting and everything to this scene, this is going to look really bad. So one good way to deal with circles like this, if we want to move this forward, we can just do grid fill. And that'll add some decent geometry in the beginning that we could actually end up working with later down the line. This is huge. This is super important. This is like the one thing I'm going to show you that is probably like what you should be doing. So let's rotate this. I'll go back to layout mode, and we can rotate this. We want to rotate this exactly, 90 degrees? So we'll rotate this along the x-axis, and we could try to ballpark it. We can see in the top left there that we are getting really close, 90. Just can't get it perfect. We can just type in 90 after hitting X, and that'll make sure that we rotate it exactly 90 degrees every single time. And then we just want to lift this up, GZ, GX, drag it back, and then we could scale it a little bit. We could do a SX, and you'll see here, it's not really, because I moved it around in edit mode before, it's not scaling the way that I want it to. And that's because the origin is right where there's a little arrow going to the origin here. Right here, you can see it. That is not on the actual item. And that's why it's scaling it so strangely. If we were to try to rotate this, you'll notice it rotates in a really weird pattern. And so how do we fix that? One way to do it, we're going to right click it, and we're going to set the origin to its geometry. And that'll put the origin right back in the middle. And if we rotate it now, you'll see that it's right back where we want it. So let's just put that somewhere there. Maybe move it a little bit more forward. And yeah, it's pretty good. Not too bad. We could actually use this for the fin in the back as well. So let's grab this. We'll do GX. Make sure you duplicate it and drop it down. Then GZ, GZ, and there we go. I'll also rotate this along the y-axis and bring it down a little bit more. I could lift that up, rotate that a little bit more, and that's not too bad. We can also do it, we can scale locally. So you'll notice that if I was to scale along the x-axis like this, it would just push it in how we expected. If I were to hit X again, it's a little bit different because we rotated it, and this will scale it along the original x-axis that we had. So let's quickly reshape his head and body to look a little more natural. we're going to go to the front facing view here. I'm going to turn on my Y symmetry, and we're going to use the elastic grab tool. And I'm going to click above his head, click down on the left button, and then just drag it down ever so slightly. Hello, me from the future. If you want to change the size of your brush, you can change through the radius up here, or you can hit F, and that will let you scale the brush in sculpt mode. Okay, back to the future. And I think that's good enough. I think less is more in this situation. We'll do a little bit on the bottom, and that's good. I'm going to consider that head to be done. And then we're going to go back and make sure that you can only sculpt the object that you have selected. So if I wanted to try to sculpt on the body, it wouldn't work right now. So I have to go back to layout mode or object mode, click on the body, and then go back. And yes, we could change through here. I like using the tabs at the top. It keeps me centered, but whatever works for you. So now let's actually add all of these symmetry modifiers on, because you'll see we just want to sort of square this out a little bit. Let's just make him a little less of a circle, more of like a little pill shape, right? I think that's pretty good. And then I'm going to turn off some of these modifiers. We'll leave the Y modifier on, and I could just drag his butt down and in a little bit. Make him look more like the weird axolotl that he is. That's great. I'm going to make this tail a bit smaller, and you can make whatever adjustments that you see fit. We could Bob Ross this. Every little thing is a happy little accident. You know, there are no mistakes when you're making 3D stuff. I wouldn't be too hard on yourself. It's a really daunting process to learn all of this stuff, and honestly, the stuff that comes out looking wonky is my favorite. I think it's just so much more fun that way. So let's make this leg look more like a leg. One thing that we're going to want here is to make sure that we have the Dyn topo on, because otherwise when we start to drag this out, it's going to look really bad. It is a little high poly, so it's not going to be the worst. But I'm going to use the elastic snake hook tool here. And one thing I didn't point out earlier. Okay, welcome back to the future. It's me again. I forgot to teach you guys how to scale your brush. So now we're back at the leg. We want to drag this out, make sure our Dyn topo is on. If you click off, it's going to reset that. And I'm just going to come over here and grab this front foot. I'll be rotating my camera to make sure that I'm not just pulling out the side leg. And honestly, that doesn't look too bad to me. It's a little narrow, but I kind of like that. I think that's perfect. So obviously it's not in the perfect position, so I'm going to grab that and move that back a little bit. Maybe we could rotate it just slightly and lift it up. He's got stubby little legs, right? Could drag that in. Oh dear. Maybe that's a little bit better. I like that. Can make it a little smaller. But once again, however you would like to do it, as long as you're happy with it, that's all that matters. And we can mirror this, so we don't have to worry about duplicating it and adding another one. If we go to our wrench tool over here, it'll show you modifiers. We can add a modifier on this, go to generate, mirror, and now it'll mirror it where it is right now. So you'll see we're mirroring it on the x-axis compared to itself. We'll unclick that, we'll do Y, and then we'll want to mirror it over an object, that object being its body. So I'm going to click on the eyedropper tool and then click on the body, and there you go. You'll also notice that it makes mistakes a lot more obvious, at least to me it does. So we can go into sculpt and I'll turn off this modifier right now. We can do a little bit of editing and you'll see that it actually edits the other object as well. It's still being mirrored, so we don't have to worry about changing the other one yet. Now, if we were to apply that mirror, then we would have some problems, but for now, it's fine. And we want to use these feet for the back as well. So let's just hit Shift and D as we learned before, duplicate, GX, and there you go. We could slide it to the back. Now he's got cheeks. We don't really want that. So let's grab them, move them in, and that's perfect. I think that's perfect. I think it looks cute. I think maybe we make the head a little bigger. And wonderful. So one thing you might have noticed is that if we look at this from exactly from the middle, his fin is pretty much invisible. There's no width to it. So another modifier that we can add is the solidify modifier. We go down to generate, solidify, and we can add some thickness. Now you'll notice that it's going to go off a little bit to the side. That's because our offset is at -1. If we were to change this to 1, it would go on the other side. So let's just make that 0, and it'll be dead center. And we have some nice even thickness in the front. I'm actually going to sculpt this a little bit. So I'm going to make sure I'm only on the y-axis here. I don't have any modifiers on or anything. And I'm just going to flatten that out. I'm going to drag this out this way. Sort of just give it some more of a Mudkip fin shape. The reason I make sure that I'm on this axis is because if I'm not, then we're going to start getting some not symmetrical. Oh, it wasn't so obvious there, but it won't be symmetrical when we look back to it. So I won't spend too much time on this. You know, one thing I would also recommend, you could put another reference. You can duplicate your reference and rotate it 45, 90 degrees, and then put it wherever you want. So you can look at it from the side over here. You can make it actually look like Mudkip, as I've clearly failed to do. Go back to here, you know, round that out. Do it how you will. Not too shabby. And we could actually add the thickness modifier over here as well. How much did I put on? 0.09. So I'll do 0.09 for this. Go to generate, solidify, 0.09. And we'll make sure that is on 0 offset. Wonderful. We're almost done. We basically have the shape of Mudkip. We just have to do this front little thing over here, his front little piece. So if we want to add these little things on his face, let's use some cones for this. We'll come over, we'll grab a cone from our meshes. I'll rotate this along the x-axis, 90 degrees. You know what? I want to do it on the right side. So if I have it like this, I will hit minus, and then it'll make it -90. And now I have the perfect cone for his little face. We can scale this. If I hit Z, or if I hit S and then Z twice, I'll be scaling this along the local Z axis here. So that'll allow me to move it around a little more freely, but it's pretty wide. So why don't I scale it down the X axis just a tad? That's pretty good. And I'll move this forward as we see fit. That's not too bad. And I will go back to this mode. We'll look at it from the front. And then I can duplicate this and then rotate along the x-axis. We can add another one. Let's shrink that down. Yeah. You know, let's not worry about it too much. And then we could actually mirror this one. You know, that's not looking the way that I want it to. That's a bit better. Now I can mirror this similar to how we did the other items. We can go into object, or sorry, add modifier, generate, mirror, and then I'll do Y because it's mirroring along this cone that I rotated. So if I were to apply the transformations to this cone, let's go back. I'll just show you how that works. If I apply the rotation here, now if I add a modifier, mirror Z, on that. There you go. So now we have this object being mirrored over this one, and we have really 2 items here that look like 3, but we want them to be 1 because we don't want to have to put a mirror on for every single thing, right? We could apply this mirror. This is something that we won't be able to undo later, but that's okay. We could either mouse over the mirror and hit Control A, or we can click this drop down and click the apply button. And now everything that we do, these are going to be the same object. And we can go one step further. We can have this object selected, and we can shift click the middle cone over here. And now we can hit Control J, which will join all of this geometry together. And now this will be considered one object. For our purposes, this is fine. This isn't the best practice, but once again, for this, it's okay. And we just want to modify this by mirroring it along the face. So I'm going to do Y, click on the face, and then boom, we have a very, this is definitely Mudkip. The only thing that we're missing is color. And so if we were to go and do the material preview, we would see that he is just this clay, and he does look like a golf ball. So if you're worried that Mudkip is going to look like a golf ball, do not fret. It's okay. We can smooth them out. If we just click on the object and then we right click again, we can make shade smooth. And then you'll not even notice that he originally looked like a golf ball. Shade smooth might look weird for some cones. So what we could do is click auto smooth. It might look weirder for you. Who knows? I think it looks just fine. If you want to just do it smooth, that's okay too. We can also smooth everything by clicking A, shade smooth. You'll have some weird artifacts on the solid things over here. So I would just recommend keeping those shaded auto smooth. You can click on them separately, but there we go. So now we get to add color. This is kind of the most fun part for me, I think. But there's tons of different ways to do materials. I would definitely recommend having nodes turned on for the future, but I don't know if it's really going to come into play now. I'll show you how to do that really quick. We'll go to Edit, Preferences, and then you'll have add-ons shown over here. And there are tons and tons of free add-ons that you can use. The number one that I would recommend is Node Wrangler. I don't know if it's selected by default anymore or nowadays, but if you just search add-ons and you search Node Wrangler, that'll come up. Definitely click it. It's not going to cost you money. It's not going to do anything. It's completely free and it's built into the software. It's great. So let's add first a blue color for him. We're going to click on this material button down here, the little golf ball. It might be in front of my head. You see right there. Right there. That button right there. That's where we choose all of our materials. So I'll click on that and then I'll click new. And we'll have the ability to choose, it'll automatically give us a principled BSDF here. We're going to keep that. And then we get to choose the base color, which we can eyedropper onto our reference. I'm going to pick just in the middle over here. And you'll see it gives us this blue color. We can adjust a couple of things here. The metallic, it'll make it look more metallic, obviously. We do roughness. If we drop the roughness down, it'll look very smooth and wet, which we actually might want a little bit because Mudkip is very smooth. If we turn it all the way up, it's going to look very matte. It's not going to reflect much of anything at all, but you know, these are super fun to play around with, in my opinion. So let's drop that down to, you know, 0.4 is probably okay. The IOR, this is sort of like how light reflects off of it. I would worry more about that for like glass materials. And alpha is how see-through it is. So 1 is going to be normal. If you drop it down, you'll start to have more of a see-through object like that. We don't want that, so let's crank that up. We could use that in the back fin over here. If we were to add a new material, we could probably just keep this white, and then we could maybe put some alpha on it. And you got a little You got a little see-throughness over there. And that's not too bad. Of course, that's going to have to render out, and there's no lighting or anything in the scene, so it's always going to sort of look a little bit weird. I'm just going to keep it as white. If we want to reuse that color, and we don't want to just guesstimate or have to redo all of the settings, you can see that we have a drop-down menu over here. We can just click on our original material, material 1, and it has a little blue dot next to it, so you could sort of tell which one you're dealing with. And we can use that for the back legs. We could use that for the top part right here. And we're getting so close to finished. If we do one more for the orange, now we have basically Mudkip right now. We can add the eyes as objects, and we can do a couple of things for making the body 2 different colors. But what I would recommend is that we unwrap these items and then we create some textures for it. So this is often a very confusing and laborious process, especially if you want to do it right. Like I said, I'm not doing things efficiently. I'm doing them so we could take a picture of it. That's basically it. And I'm doing this for fun. So I'm not teaching you the most optimal way to do this stuff. If you're going to get into character creation and rigging and animation, you can look elsewhere. But for our purposes, I'll show you how to draw on Mudkip and on Mudkip's body. So let's start with the body because it's simpler. Let's actually just both give these textures. So the easiest way to give an item a texture is to go to New for the material, and rather than the base color on a principled BSDF, on the base color, we're going to click on the yellow dot next to it, and then I'll click on image texture, and you'll see that it immediately turns black, and we have the options for new or open, where you can import a texture here. I'm going to click on new, and we're just going to title it Mudkip body. Click on new image, and now it's still black. We're going to do the same thing, except for Mudkip's head, and we're going to name it Mudkip head. Wonderful. So now we actually have, if we go into texture paint, if we come over to this left side here, you'll see that we actually have an image called Mudkip head, and it is completely black, and it's got this weird grid, sort of Charlie Brown type, symbol across of it. This is technically Mudkip's head. If I were to draw on this, you could see that it actually turns his head the color that I had selected over here. Now, this is more suboptimal than even I'm okay with. So we're going to want to mess around with this little grid here. These are called UVs, and this is basically how your mesh is projected against a texture. And to edit this, we could obviously go to UV editing, and we make sure that we have our object selected, and you'll notice that in this view, our entire head is selected here. And Blender has this godsend that I'm okay with using. Again, this is not the most optimal thing, but we can just hit UV, and we can hit unwrap and smart UV project. And I will add a little bit of an island margin. This just means that if we have any islands, they're not going to end up touching each other. And now you'll see we have a decently, maybe not so decently, but we have an unwrapped sphere right here. And that will make things easier down the line for all of us. And we could do this in the same if we go to object mode, back to edit mode for our body. We're going to unwrap this. We'll go unwrap, UV project, make sure the island margin's on, and click unwrap. And now if we view this in our material preview, and we go back to texture paint, let's grab a brush here, or let's grab the fill tool, and I'll make it this white on Mudkip's chin. Make sure that we're in texture paint mode, actually. That'll be easier for us. And then we could just click that on. And now we have, we don't have much different than we had before, but we have a base color that we can use. And if we wanted to get the exact color that we had for for Mudkip's body, we're going to have to do a little bit of finagling. So the way that I like to do this is in texture paint. I'll go back to object mode, and I'm going to click on the color that I want to grab. Because if I were to just say, let's say that I wanted to, I could grab it from the reference like I did before, but there's no saying that I'm going to click on the exact same spot. And there's so many different colors you see here. If I just go across, there's a white reflection and there's like a darker spot on the back. Every time I try to click one of his legs, it's going to be a different blue. And it doesn't look the same as it does there. So one way that we could combat this is if I click on one of the legs and we go back to the material, our color will pop up over here. So we can just eyedropper that, and beautiful. Now, if it still doesn't look exactly the same, it's because the roughness wasn't the same as the before. So we could actually drop this roughness down. Even though it has the image on, we can drop that down to, what was it, 402? Yeah, 402. And I'll do the same for the body. Make sure that we are going to texture paint, and boom, beautiful. So now I'll go back and I can grab this base color once again, and we're on the body and it's time to paint on it. So we can actually draw on this texture to the side, or we can just draw straight on the model, which is always so much fun in my opinion. So we can just zoom in and we can add some white for his belly. Remember our rotation tools that we used before. And we could just add some flare. We can add some hot rod flames, because we can. We add hot rod flames to this Mudkip. Isn't that beautiful? If you want to have your mirrors on, you can do that. You can do it without them. Just honestly, just do whatever makes you happy. And so this is just us going to be finishing up now. We can grab the face and we can add a little bit of his chin. He's got these big orange spots on his side. So I'll just come over here and I'll grab the orange. And I'll make a big circle. We could actually go into the Y view and then just crank up. Same thing here with our radius. If we use the F button, just click a bunch of times. Now we have these big circles. And go back, we can grab some black. If you're having trouble seeing your reference and you want to move it around, go ahead and do that. You could actually do that in the texture paint mode if we're in object. Go to the view that we want, and I'll just make it so he's peeking right over the edge so you could see how we're massacring him, his poor boy. And we'll go click on our object, back to texture paint, and we'll make his eyeballs. And this is really where, one, having a tablet helps. I have a tablet and I never tend to use it. And I have the worst hand. It's very unsteady. But this is where having your mirror modifier really, really helps. Or your symmetry, whatever you want to call it. Pokemon loves to do this thing where they give you a little gray at the bottom of the eyes. I would say that if you're doing reflections in eyes, I would not have your modifiers on, your symmetry modifiers. Although that looked bad. That's just rough. Maybe you don't need to do it, but I certainly will. I think it just looks better for me. And there we go. We could just do our little finishing touches. If you want to add an outline here, go ahead. Like I said, I have the worst hand in the West. But this is my little Mudkip with hot rod flames. I forgot to mention, when you're going to exit, make sure that you save your images. Make sure that you save these textures, because if you don't save these textures, they'll be gone. So when the image has been changed, you'll see a little star next to it. Make sure you save those, because if you try to import this or if you try to reopen this, you're going to have some issues and you won't be able to get those textures back. And we could also use texture painting to make those little lines. You know, it is grid filled, so there's some things that we could do with this to actually make it easier, but we don't really need to worry about it because I think it looks beautiful. I hope you do too. And I hope that you enjoyed this. If you want to show me the Mudkip that you made, if you spent a little bit more time on it and you weren't narrating all of this to yourself while you were doing it, then make sure to drop it in my Discord. I'll put a link in the comment section. And yeah, you know, let me know if you want me to make another Pokemon tutorial. Sorry, I'm just gonna, you know, let me know if you have any other Pokemon that you want me to make, or if you want some tutorials on Blender. I know I'm not the best at this, but I just think it's fun. So I hope you thought it was fun too. Bye.